Now, in the private markets, credit markets, we just talk about a death spiral. And a death spiral is that part of the cycle when the debtor needs to borrow money in order to pay debt service, and it accelerates, and then everybody sees that and they don't want to hold the debt. That's where we're approaching.
In the private credit markets, we just talk about a debt-death spiral. And a debt-death spiral is that part of the cycle when the debtor needs to borrow money in order to pay debt service, and it accelerates. And then everybody sees that, and they don't want to hold the debt. That's where we're approaching. A debt-death spiral. That is what the founder of the largest hedge fund in the world is describing right now. And he is not talking about some distant future scenario. He says that is where we are approaching today. Trump is changing how money works in 2026, and I am going to show you exactly how. The geopolitical situation in the Middle East is pushing energy prices higher, and that does not just make your gas more expensive. It makes your groceries more expensive at the exact same time. And on top of that, the United States economy is entering what Ray Dalio calls the late stages of the long-term debt cycle, the same cycle you just heard him describe. Now, in case you are not familiar with who Ray Dalio is, he is the founder of Bridgewater Associates, the largest hedge fund in the world, and his team has spent years studying economies going back hundreds of years. What they found is the exact same cycle happening again and again and again across different empires, different centuries, different currencies, and here is how it works. A new economy rises and becomes the world's superpower. For the United States, that moment came after World War II, around 1943. And then in 1944 and 1945, the US dollar became the world's reserve currency. In case you did not know, the dollar was not always the world's reserve currency. That started around 1944 to 1945. In the first phase, the economy can use debt strategically. You borrow money. That money creates more income. The economy grows. People become wealthier. Productivity goes up. The country is borrowing, but it is borrowing in a way that produces more than what the debt actually costs. Then you hit a turning point. You keep borrowing, even when it is not as strategic, even when it is not as productive, because you have become used to it. And now you start to see this bubble form. The economy starts to struggle because you realize we borrowed a little too much. And that is when the long-term debt cycle enters its final phase. Productivity is going down, but borrowing is going up. Why do you keep borrowing? Because now, as an economy, as a nation, as an empire, you have become dependent on that debt. You need it to keep the economy running, to support more jobs. But as you print more money, the value of the currency goes down, and you have to keep printing. Because people think they need more money, because the cost of living keeps going up. And this is the exact stage Ray Dalio says we have entered. And during this stage, Ray Dalio says, is when geopolitical tensions escalate, and when economies, currencies, and empires can flip. So here is what I want to cover today. Number one is Ray Dalio's long-term debt cycle and what it actually means. Number two is what President Trump is doing to the economy right now and how he is changing our money. And number three is what this all means for you as an investor. So if you are an investor, stay with me until the end. Now, if you have read any of Ray Dalio's work, he says that in the late stages of the long-term debt cycle, there are 5 things that happen, 5 key indicators. And he has already said the United States is in those late stages. So let's go through all 5. Number 1 is high government debt. Not just any debt, government debt. The United States government has been spending money it does not have. And every time it spends money it does not have, it has to borrow, which is why we now have over $38 trillion in national debt. And in 2025, we spent more money on interest payments on that debt than we spent on our entire national defense budget. That is how big the problem has gotten. Number 2 is rising internal conflict, conflicts inside the country itself, more polarizing political views, a kind of internal fracture where the country stops pulling together and starts pulling apart, and that weakens everything. Because a divided nation cannot respond to challenges the way a united one can. Ray Dalio says we have already been seeing this in the United States. Number 3 is the rise of a rival power. Foreign countries look at a weakening empire and see an opening. They start making moves. They grow their economies. They grow their currencies. They position themselves to challenge the number 1 spot. And Ray Dalio says, we have been watching this happen with China. The Chinese central bank has been buying physical gold aggressively as a way to strengthen its currency and compete against the United States dollar. And the Chinese economy has been doing everything it can to try to rival and eventually surpass the United States. Number 4 is currency debasement, the currency losing value. The US dollar is not backed by gold. It is not backed by any physical asset. It is just paper, backed by a promise from the US government that it has value. When you print more of that paper, each piece of it is worth less. We have been watching that happen since COVID, and in 2025, the US dollar lost about 10% of its value. That was one of the worst years for the dollar in about a decade. Now, why does that matter? Because Trump has also been talking about wanting a weaker dollar to help with trade. A weaker dollar means foreign countries can buy more American goods. That might be good for exports. But for people inside the United States who earn dollars, save dollars, and spend dollars, a weaker dollar means you buy less with every single one. And that is exactly what Ray Dalio says we have been seeing. Then number 5. Once you reach those other 4 points, Ray Dalio says you almost always see external geopolitical conflict emerge. Either a rival power moves when it senses weakness, or the dominant power gets drawn into overseas operations to generate economic activity, redirect attention, or try to unify the population. But what Ray Dalio says is that by the time you reach this stage, sustaining those overseas operations becomes extremely costly, and keeping the country united through that process becomes equally difficult. That, according to Ray Dalio, is where we are right now. So, now that you understand the theory, let me walk you through what is actually happening in our economy today. Because in 2025, things started to change through tariffs. Now tariffs were not just about collecting more tax revenue. The deeper goal was to pull business back into the United States and to apply economic pressure on China at the same time. Here is why that matters. China and the United States have been massive trade partners. A huge amount of U.S. goods were being made in Chinese facilities. So China was getting rich off the business the United States was sending their way. And if China's economy keeps growing faster than the United States, which it has been, that is a real problem, because that means China could eventually outpace America. So the tariffs were not just revenue. They were designed to pull those businesses out of China, to slow down the Chinese economy, and to reduce China's ability to keep growing at that pace. But that is not all. Trump has also been pushing for a weaker dollar. And in 2025, we got one. The dollar had one of its worst years in a decade. For every person inside the United States who works for dollars and saves dollars, a weaker dollar means you need more of them to buy the same things. And the problem is wages have not been rising fast enough to keep up. Then there is the Federal Reserve. Trump has been talking about replacing the Fed chairman with someone named Kevin Warsh. And why does that matter? Because Trump wants lower interest rates. He has been very open about that. And Warsh is expected to deliver on those lower rates. He is expected to take the chairmanship in May. Now lower interest rates sound good on the surface. Cheaper to borrow, more spending, economy moves. But here is the problem. When you lower interest rates and people borrow more and spend more, prices go up. That makes inflation worse. And this was already a concern before anything escalated in the Middle East, because Trump was pushing for lower rates while inflation was still a problem. And then we have what is happening with energy prices because of the situation in the Middle East. Following U.S. operations in the region, energy prices shot up. More expensive energy means more expensive transportation, more expensive production, which means inflation gets harder to control, which means cutting interest rates just became a whole lot more complicated. So, now that you understand the Ray Dalio philosophy and what is going on in the economy, the question is, what does this mean for you as an investor? Now history does not repeat exactly, but it rhymes. The last time we saw money change in a real fundamental way was the early 1970s, when the dollar was taken off the gold standard. And during that time, gold prices boomed while the stock market got hurt. The economy was struggling and investors were concerned. Now here is what is different today. By the time we got here, gold had already been rising since the pandemic because people have been worried about the dollar for years. So the question is not whether gold can go up. It already has. The question is whether it keeps going. And the answer is we do not know. But if you are concerned about the dollar and you believe it is going to keep losing value, historically gold has done well in those environments. Now I want to be clear. I am not here to tell you what to buy. I am just someone making videos. Investing has risks. You can lose money. You will lose money at some point. Always do your own research. Never blindly follow anyone, including me. My goal is just to help you think like an investor, to find opportunities based on where the economy is moving. I am not here to tell you what to think. I am here to help you think. So, with that said, here are 5 potential areas where history and current conditions are pointing in the same direction. Number 1 is gold. If you are worried about the dollar losing value, gold is historically one of the clearest responses to that concern. You do not need to buy physical gold bars. An ETF like GLD gives you exposure to gold prices without holding the metal yourself. But here is what you need to understand. Gold is not always the right trade. Here is the proof. Between 2008 and 2012, when the financial crisis hit and money was being printed through quantitative easing, people were terrified the dollar was going to collapse. Gold prices surged. But then, in 2012, when people started to realize the crisis was passing and the dollar was going to be okay, gold reversed sharply. It crashed in 2012. It kept falling in 2013, in 2014, in 2015, in 2016, in 2017, in 2018, in 2019. And then gold started hitting new highs in 2020. What happened in 2020? The pandemic hit, the money printer turned back on, and the cycle repeated. So gold is directly tied to concerns about the dollar. When those concerns go up, gold tends to go up. When those concerns fade, gold comes back down. Number 2 is energy. Anytime we have seen geopolitical tension in the Middle East in the past, oil prices go up and energy costs go up. Who benefits from that? Energy companies. If the current situation extends longer than expected, those companies keep generating revenue at elevated margins. An ETF like XLE gives you exposure to U.S. oil and energy companies. But understand this is contingent on energy prices staying elevated. If the situation stabilizes quickly, that changes the picture. Number 3 is the defense sector. When geopolitical tensions remain elevated, government spending on national defense contracts increases. That spending flows directly to publicly traded companies in the aerospace and defense industry. Companies producing logistics systems, hardware, aerospace technology, and advanced electronics under government contract. Those companies are on the stock market. You can own them. A defense sector ETF gives you exposure to the whole industry. And as government contracts grow, those companies grow with them. Number 4 is U.S. industrials. If the tariff strategy works and manufacturing comes back to the United States, the companies driving that reshoring benefit directly. They avoid tariff costs. They reduce supply chain risk. They build domestic production capacity. An ETF like XLI gives you exposure to that entire category. And number 5, on the more defensive side, is real estate. No matter what happens with AI, no matter what happens with tariffs or the dollar or the Federal Reserve, people need a place to live. Businesses need space to operate. Physical real estate holds real value that paper assets cannot fully replicate. You can own it directly and generate rental income from it. Or, if you want market exposure, an ETF like SCHD gives you access to high dividend-paying companies in the United States. And I want to be transparent here. I am personally invested in SCHD. That does not mean you should be. But what SCHD is an ETF made up of companies with strong profits that keep growing how much income they pay to investors. It is not a big growth play. It is a stability and income play. And the way you win with all of these positions over time is through a strategy I call ABB. Always be buying. You buy every week, every 2 weeks, every month. Regardless of whether markets are going up or going down, the only time you adjust is when markets drop. Because then you can consider buying a little more, because you are getting the same assets at a lower price. So, let me bring this all together for you. What we covered today is that the economy is changing. The situation in the Middle East is going to keep affecting energy prices and inflation. We do not know for how long. But Ray Dalio has been warning about this for years. And right now, the United States is showing all 5 signs of the late stage of the long-term debt cycle. Rising national debt, rising internal conflict, the rise of China as a rival power, currency debasement, with the dollar losing about 10% of its value in 2025, and now escalating geopolitical tensions overseas. Ray Dalio says that when you get to this stage, the dollar can lose its status as the world's reserve currency, not necessarily in the next 6 to 12 months, but in the coming years. And that is something that could change a lot of things for a lot of people. Then we covered 5 potential areas where investors are paying attention right now. Gold benefits when people are worried about the dollar. Energy companies profit when energy prices stay elevated. The defense sector grows when government contracts expand. U.S. industrials benefit if reshoring works. And real estate and dividend income give you stability and cash flow through the uncertainty. Again, I am not telling you what to invest in. I am just here to help you think like an investor. If you got value from this video, the best thank you is a share. Send it to a friend, a family member, a colleague, or a fellow investor. Let's keep spreading this kind of financial thinking. Thank you for watching Global Daily Wire.